Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena for part 2 of the air conditioning install. Hopefully by the end of this video we'll have a fully functional setup that we can test. Now if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I'll include a link for that down in the description.
My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the top sides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure.
In part 1 I got the ducting installed and I ran the hose and the cable we'll need to get the unit all connected. Now it's time for the only part of the installation I'm a little bit nervous about, and that's installing the through hull for the overboard discharge. That's not a big deal normally, but the boat is in the water right now. Included with the pump was this diagram. This shows you all of the plumbing. You got to focus on this little square up here. That shows you what to do. The other ones are showing you what not to do. This is all the plumbing we need. We already have a through hull that's mounted below the waterline. The sea strainer I'll install a little bit later. The pump came with the air conditioning unit, and then up here above the waterline we have the overboard discharge. If we look here we can see that the pump is installed below the waterline, and it is incorrect to install it above the waterline. Looking at the pump here, this looks an awful lot like a centrifugal pump to me, and at least to my knowledge those are typically not self-priming, which that would explain why the instructions are so clear that this guy needs to be installed below the waterline. So I need to figure out exactly where the waterline is located with a pretty high degree of accuracy, because of course I want to make sure that the pump is mounted below that, but even more so I want to make sure that the hole I drill for the overboard discharge is definitely above the waterline. I want to install the overboard discharge here inside of the locker, but unfortunately, as you can see, I've already put up insulation. I say unfortunately because if I hadn't done that, then I could have used something like this little thermal camera for my iPhone to figure out exactly where the waterline is. But with the insulation in place, that's not gonna work. I've come up with a different solution. I've temporarily hooked up this hose. This is the inlet hose to the through hull. I've then run that hose along the inside of the hull in here and then up, way up high. As soon as I open the through hull, we should be able to see exactly where the water level is. I cheated a little bit and added a couple of drops of blue food coloring to the hose before attaching it to the through hull so we could more easily see the water level. Turns out the water level is basically this shelf here. You can see the blue color there bouncing up and down as the boat's rocking. There are many good choices when it comes to through hulls. I've used a bunch of True Designs composite through hulls throughout Athena, especially in places where I know they're not going to get hit by anything. But in other places, like for instance underneath the holding tank, I've used some of Groco's bronze through hulls. And this is what I'm going to use for the overboard discharge for the air conditioning. So let's start the installation. Because I'll be drilling a hole in the hull with the boat in the water, the very first thing I did was to get out our leak sealing kit. This contains an assortment of wooden bungs and some of this Hero Seal stuff. The Groco backing plates are made out of what feels like PVC plastic, and they come with these little thread inserts for securing the through hull. Of course, getting the threads gummed up with epoxy would not be good, so I covered up the back of the inserts with a bit of tape. I cut away the insulation where I was planning on drilling the hole and placed some ice up against the side of the hull. Using my thermal camera, the ice shows up as the slightly darker blue spot right above the waterline. I had a hole saw that's about 2 millimeters bigger than the skin fitting, which seems perfect to me. With the hole drilled and the boat still floating, I needed to prep the inside of the hull. To not get dust everywhere, I covered myself with a blanket. Then it was time to mix up a little bit of thickened epoxy. I applied a generous amount to the back of the backing plate and smooshed it in place, making absolutely sure to line up the two holes perfectly. The last deed of the day was to check the length of the skin fitting to make sure it doesn't bottom out on the inside of the ball valve. Turns out I need to remove about 15 millimeters. That was an easy job for Mr. Angle Grinder, and after having cleaned up the threads by hand, I checked the fit and it looks perfect. The next morning, the epoxy had cured enough that I could finish the installation of the through hull. I don't have the correct size bronze bolts for securing the through hull, but if I just get everything lined up, then I can easily swap those out later. After a successful test fit to make sure everything lined up correctly, I slathered on copious amounts of Sikaflex and got the skin fitting installed and cleaned up the excess Sikaflex. Please excuse the dirty hull. There's not much point in me cleaning it while we're still here in Mindelo. It seems like every other day we get a fresh truckload of sand direct from Africa via air, and it's just very difficult to keep anything white clean. Next up, let's move on to the saltwater pump. I've already installed the two hose spout fittings on here. These are two different sizes. For the inlet size, you'll need 3/4 inch hose, and for the outlet side, you'll need 1/2 inch hose. I've got the pump installed here behind me. We know from earlier on that the shelf here sits just right below the water level and the pump sits below the shelf, so that location should be good. I've also trimmed the excess hose here and connected the hose to the pump. There are some restrictions as to how you can orient the pump. What I've done is number 2 on the list here. The 2 top ones are correct and the 2 bottom ones are incorrect. The pump gets connected directly to the electrical box, which is this black guy here. He's already pre-wired up to the air conditioning unit, but of course, because the Smart Start is a separate optional add-on, it's not wired up yet. There is a wire harness already attached to the Smart Start, which makes everything a lot easier. Now it also comes with very thorough instructions here. If you're not used to looking at diagrams, this might be a little bit difficult to understand, but there's also written instructions. I'm gonna wire up the Smart Start out here because, as you've seen, there's not tons of room inside of the locker. 2 of our wires here are gonna connect directly to the capacitor up here, so I think it makes a lot of sense to run everything up on this side here. To keep the conduit from falling back out, I'll just add a couple of zip ties. I'll remove this zip tie here so we can run everything together when we've made the new connections. And this would all be a lot easier if we could just temporarily remove the capacitor like that. There are 2 white wires connected to the capacitor. There's one that goes to the board, and then there's another one that goes into this conduit here to the compressor. So we're going to disconnect the one that goes to the compressor. And as you can see here, that gets connected to the brown wire from the Smart Start. So that would be this guy right here. So if I'm not mistaken, then we're supposed to take the red wire here and connect that where we disconnected the white one. That means we have, let's see, there's an orange wire here, which according to the diagram here is connected to a blue or orange, which would be the other one. So yeah, that seems right. I had to remove the little plastic doodads on the connectors here. There's just not enough room for it, especially with the blue one, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So that now looks like this, and that is all the connections to the capacitor, so we can go ahead and smush that back into place. And we can slap a little zip tie on here to make everything a little bit neater. The final connection we need to make from the Smart Start is the black wire here, and it looks like that is dependent on what system you're using it with. For Dometic systems, you're supposed to connect the black wire to the Comp L1 terminal screw. The connections on the board are labeled right on the board, and there's also a sticker underneath. It's not easy to see, but right underneath the wiring harness here, it says Comp L1, which according to the diagram should be a black or purple wire. This one is black, so I think our odds are pretty good. Of course, I still need to connect the pump and also power, but I'm going to do that in the locker. The pump connects here. There's the L1, there's the pump L2 or neutral, and then there's a common ground over here. There's also the L1 here for power and the neutral for power and the ground. But before I haul the unit back into the closet, I want to install the soundproofing around the compressor and also the hose spout fitting for the condensation pan. There are 3 locations where you can install this guy. There's one here, and then finally this option right here. I think this is the best option for me because that's not going to take away any room in the hanging section of the locker. For the sake of paranoia, I added a tiny dab of Sikaflex just to make absolutely sure this won't leak, because getting access to that connection once the unit is installed is going to be very annoying. But yeah, let's move on to the sound insulation. This is going to be a little bit of a 3D puzzle, but it does come with very thorough instructions. According to the spec, if memory serves, I think the sound insulation here is supposed to remove up to 50% of the sound from the compressor. So this piece is going to go on this side, and then this is going to go on the other side. But first, there are some little clips we need to put on. There's one clip that goes right next to the hose fitting we just installed, and then the other one goes on the other side. So somewhere like here, and the other one over here. I did fiddle around with this a little bit last week just to see what I was in for, and it's not difficult to install. It's just you need to have everything in its right place before you try and do anything. The conduit in here just needs to be out of the way so this thing can get all the way in. And once it is, there's a little hole up here that lines up, and that is going to get a screw. Once you have the first half in, it's pretty easy. You just got to get that conduit up there, and then get this guy in there, get that out of the way. Something like that. The sound insulation comes with these little clips here. They're used for joining together the two halves. Sound insulation done. I've just realized that I may have been a little bit too hasty there, because these things are what actually secure the air conditioning unit, and they sit over the lip of the pan here. So we'll have to get those up under there. I think it's easiest just to add the feet that are not underneath the sound insulation when the unit is in place. As you can see, the feet have little rubber isolators on there to deal with the vibrations from the unit. And also, if you look at this little note here, it feels like there are some rubber isolators underneath the pan, which will explain this warning. I think we're ready to drag this guy into the locker and make all of the connections.
I started by attaching the hose for the overboard discharge to the through hull. That gets held firmly in place by two hose clamps, and each of those hose clamps gets a little clamp jacket. As you can see, there's not exactly a lot of room in here, so getting the unit in place is gonna take a little bit of effort. Fortunately, the middle shelf is removable. I doubt it would be possible for me to install the unit here if that wasn't the case. I purposely left the 7-inch ducting way too long to make sure I had enough, so I trimmed that down to size and attached it to the unit. The hose for the condensation pan is a very tight fit, so I added a bit of soap for some lubrication. This hose is in no way connected to salt water, and I am running low on hose clamps, so I just used a single hose clamp. I added a cable clamp to make sure the hose will never sit higher than the lip of the condensation pan. After a little bit of cable management, things were looking nice and tidy behind the unit. The bottom gray hose goes from the unit to the pump, and the top gray hose goes to the overboard discharge. I'll connect that gray hose to the clear hose later on. Satisfied that I had made all of the connections to the unit, I finally drilled holes and through-bolted the feet to the shelf. Then there was just the small matter of connecting the pump and the power to the electrical box. The connections are clearly marked on the board, so it's very straightforward. If I was to do it again, I would have disconnected the display cable and run that up with the wiring harness for the Smart Start, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. The Smart Start box comes with double-sided tape on the back, but I'll hold off on mounting it till I'm absolutely sure everything works. Then there was just the small matter of swapping out the breaker on our distribution panel for a 30 amp breaker, and I also added a toggle guard to make sure we don't accidentally turn the air conditioning on or off. I've cheated a little bit and installed the sea strainer, connected the inlet hose, and opened the through hull off camera. So we should now be ready to turn on the air conditioning. We'll open up the toggle guard, cross our fingers, and flip the breaker. Ta-da! The display has come on. That's certainly a great start.
Before I attempt to turn the inside of the boat into a deep freezer, there is a commissioning process that's outlined in the manual that came with the display. It's outlined right here in 731 commissioning procedure. First, they want us to turn on the fan to verify that that worked. Then they want us to change the set point to see that the compressor comes on and that seawater starts flowing. There's a little icon here for controlling the fan. If we hit that, the fan should start. Yep. Hear the fan. Let's turn it up and see how loud it can get. You might recall from part 1 that the vent here in the forward cabin is right over here. But in terms of sound level, that is not loud. Let's turn the fan back to auto mode so it stops, and then we'll lower the set point to start the compressor. As you can see right now, the temperature here inside of the boat is 24 degrees Celsius. Let's just make sure the set point is below that. So we'll go to 18 degrees Celsius. And turn on the air conditioning. Down here in status, it now says cool active. And I would say, yep, that indeed feels like cold air. Because of the curvature of the hull, it's difficult for me to verify visually that we have salt water flowing through the overboard discharge. So to make absolutely sure the pump is working, I just real quickly disconnected the hose, and yep, there's indeed water flowing. That takes us through the commissioning procedure outlined over here, but there is also something on the display, some menu items we need to check. So let's do that next. If we go into the settings menu here, we should have something, yeah, troubleshooting / commissioning here. Intro and system. The below was detected for the system configuration, direct expansion heat pump, that's correct. Then we also have a alternate air sensor connected to the electrical box. Okay, so scroll down to continue. Make sure display is not located in sunlight. Using alt sensor. The fan is now energized at the above speed. Please verify that supply, air flow, and acoustics are correct. And yeah, I can hear the fan, so that's great. Then there's medium speed for the fan and high speed for the fan. All sounds perfect. Okay, no faults detected. That's awesome. Pump test. The seawater pump test is now running and pump output is energized. Please verify that the saltwater pump is on and that the pump water is overboard. Yep. The cooling cycle test is now running and the compressor should start within 15 seconds. Please verify that the compressor is operating and supply air is cooler than the room ambient. And there's also a test for the reverse cycle heating, so now we should be able to feel hot air coming out of the vent. I've now completed both the commissioning procedure outlined here in paper and the one on the display. And yeah, it seems like we have fully functional air conditioning. We shouldn't really need the air conditioning here in Modelo. It doesn't really get that warm here. But for our upcoming summer on the east coast of the US, I think sacrificing the little bit of storage we lost for then having air conditioning is going to be well worth it. Before ending this video, I want to say a great big thank you to Dometic for providing me with the DTG unit free of charge for the purpose of making this video. I'm very excited to add one of Dometic's breath ionizer modules once we get to the US. That should help eliminate some boat odor and also improve the air quality here inside of the boat. But yeah, that's a story for a later time. And potentially also in the future, it'd be really cool to do a comparison between the DTG unit and Dometic's Voyager TX series, which is those variable output units I mentioned in part 1. But yeah, that's all gonna be for later. For now, I want to start getting familiar with the DTG setup and gather a bit of test data and yeah, just take her for a spin. Next week, Ava's going to be back aboard Athena. She'll be bringing 2 refurbished autopilot drive units, so we'll be ready for the Atlantic crossing. And we'll take you guys for a quick tour around Modelo, get the boat ready for the crossing, and then shove off towards the Caribbean. So yeah, that'll be exciting. I hope to see all you guys back here aboard Athena next week for yet more tour and sailing fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!